today we have a very cool interview. We have Dave Hofer and Danny Lilker. Danny's been around the metal scene for quite a number of years, from going from Anthrax to Nuclear Assault, Brutal Truth, other bands. And this is the second edition of the book that's out. October 18th dropped Perpetual Conversion, 30 Years and Counting in the Life of Metal Veteran, Danny Lilker. So appreciate you guys joining the show today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to open up by starting with Dave. The title, Perpetual Conversion.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn through your interviews and through your friendship with Danny that made that an appropriate title for this book?
Well, it's kind of a twofold answer. One is that's the name of a Brutal Truth EP from 1993. Yeah, honestly, that was like one of the most difficult aspects of putting this book together was what the fuck do we call this thing?
Okay.
And I thought about it a lot and then just sort of had like a lightning bolt moment. Probably smoking weed on the way to my old record store job.
There you go.
And thought, just kind of thinking along the lines of like, like when there's a cover band, they always kind of like take their name from like a song or like something that kind of like ties into the original band, And I was just thinking along those lines and I thought, oh, Perpetual Conversion. Not only is it the Brutal Truth EP, but it really sums up Danny's career in a nutshell, where it's, if you want to start with Anthrax and then it changed over time into Nuclear Assault and then Brutal Truth and Hemlock and S.O.D and blah, blah, blah. Then, yeah, I thought it just summed up his career well, ever kind of fluid and changing. And of course, I ran it by him and there was no objections.
That's
And
pretty
then the
cool.
subtitle is just kind of, the summary in case you don't know what you're looking at. It just is like a one sentence sort of, summary of the book. So
That,
that's
that
the title.
that's a cool story, man. One thing, guys, that hit me as I was reading the book is I wonder how many metal fans, and even metal musicians, really know how this intense music came to be. We all know Sabbath and Maiden and Priest and AC/DC, but the '80s hardcore metal scene is at the root of so much of that music that we know and love.
Well, I guess at my age, I was lucky enough to be able to be involved in some of the earlier iterations of fast metal, for lack of a better term, post Motorhead, let's say, because they had a nice gallop too, but,
Or
that
thrash metal,
might have
yeah.
been to some drugs, who knows? But anyway, yeah. That's what I think makes the book cool, because even if you didn't know anything else and you just followed my career, you could see the path from thrash metal to death metal to grindcore to black metal as a natural evolution of somebody who keeps searching for something more intense.
But it
Or,
all starts somewhere, Danny. And one of the stories early on in the book talks about you buying Black Sabbath's greatest hits, and
Mhm.
that hits me to the core because I was, and I hope I don't lose my street cred, but I was in the Captain and Tennille fan club when I was like 10, 11, and 12, and then I was at the store and I saw Abominog, the album from Uriah Heep with the shiny red devil on it, and Kiss Alive 2, that album cover, and it just intrigued me to start to find out what is this. This is something completely different than talking about Muskrat Love, you know what I'm saying? So that's what got me involved, and it's just so cool that you have a similar story with Sabbath.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a similar story with Captain and Tennille.
Come on.
No, but I know they had a weekly show too, didn't they? Didn't they have a TV
They
show?
did, man.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
right.
good thing is I changed eventually. I went from the Captain and Tennille fan club to the Kiss Army. So I converted at some point. That's what's important.
Oh no, no, no! I'm
Don't
just
focus on Captain and
being
Tennille. Focus on The
No,
rest.
no, no. There's a lot of people I know who are like, I went straight from hip hop to black metal. I'm like, what? You know,
How do you do that?
and yeah, I mean that makes sense. They're both gangster. I don't
Yeah,
know.
sure.
Yeah.
There's a short story, a brief story in the book about your interaction meeting Lemmy from Motorhead. Freaking love Motorhead. What was that interaction like, and more importantly, what impact did Motorhead have with your musical direction at that time?
Well, let me answer the second part first because it's better chronologically. I mean, when I heard Motorhead, when I'd only actually before that heard like Iron Maiden and Angel Witch and stuff like that, which is all super heavy, but Motorhead was so much more gnarly and dirty. And then the first album that I had been played was Ace of Spades, and you look at them on the back, trying to be like squirrely Mexicans on the front and everything, just not doing a good job because it was apparently in some tar pit in London, so they made it look like it was some Western thing but yeah, so both the speed of their music, Lemmy's voice, and obviously for me as a bass player, that gnarly tone and the upfront bass sound, was fucking revolutionary.
Yeah.
And I believe I met Lemmy, probably the same thing it says in the book, if I remember correctly. It would have been at some post-show party at a bar after Metallica and Danzig played in London. And I was looking for some hash and he was looking for speed. And so neither of us could help the other guy. And in fact, when he says, "Do you know where I get any speed?" I go, "No, I'm looking for hash." He actually went,
That's the
you
weak.
know, he actually gave me a dismissive, whatever you call that. So, which was great. I'm like, "Yeah, look, sorry,
Yeah.
Bo.
No.
You want the American guy in London to show you where to get some speed. Okay, smart
Sure.
move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. When Anthrax's first album came out, Fistful of Metal, what was the thought behind putting on a really good cover of Cooper's "I'm 18"?
Well, I wasn't behind that thought. Um, well, I guess it was, I think that was, I believe, something that the label might have encouraged. I know it wasn't anybody in the bands, and we didn't really have a manager at the time. So it was
Okay.
suggested to us to do, maybe it would be good, to just do something a little bit more recognizable that some people can relate to, and maybe that'll be like, the gateway drug to what you guys are doing, whatever. I doubt they use that particular term, but you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
something
Sure.
to
Sure.
kind of
That
lull people in,
in.
But and I remember being against the idea vaguely just because we were playing thrash metal and this is our first record and shouldn't you use all the time on there to play this new exciting stuff instead of just
Originals. Yeah.
but I guess we did it justice enough. And the most ironic part was that I had just turned 19 during the recording of that, and I was the youngest guy in the band. So nobody in the band was 18 anymore when we were recording that song, but that was only by a period of a week or something.
Yeah. That's
So
crazy, man.
little irony for you there.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we know that at some point you were, dismissed from Anthrax. And Dave, you interviewed Scotty from Anthrax, obviously, and he gives a
Yeah.
detailed account of, how that all went down. You know, I got the feeling, just from reading it, that he regretted that. Is that what you got when you interviewed?
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like I it could just be because I'm more like a little tuned in now or something to that story. I didn't know anything about that before I talked to Dan and then Scott about it. And yes, is the short answer to your question. But since then, I mean, that story has been repeated. I don't know that it was not told previously. I feel like maybe this book sort of elevated that story a little bit. I just kind of get the impression at this point, like enough time has passed where like nobody gives a fuck and they're just going to be like, yo, this is what happened.
Sure.
Um, I mean, Dan can speak to the regret aspect about it as it ties into the S.O.D project. But
Right, right.
yeah, Scott was very forthcoming about that, that like, at the thing that really like made it make sense to me in a way is that you have to remember, like, when you're at that point, you don't know like what Anthrax became. You know what I mean? They were looking out for what they perceived to be their best interest at the time. You don't know what the future holds. With hindsight, I do believe there is some regret there.
One of the stories that us metal fans all have heard, which was right around that time, Danny, was you know Anthrax and Metallica, practicing in in the same space and so forth. And obviously, with when Metallica let Dave go, I mean, you were right around that whole group of that. Can you give a quick account of your firsthand knowledge of what went down?
Well, I mean, those guys were rehearsing and living at the time, Metallica, in the music building rehearsal spot in Jamaica, Queens, where Anthrax had a room, and that's the reason they got in that building, because we were rehearsing there. And then Johnny Z was like, "Where am I going to fucking put these guys?" Well, I mean, I'm just gonna and well, yeah, those were pretty interesting times. Just, I mean, obviously those guys went on. I mean, even Cliff, unfortunately, obviously in 1986. There was that tragedy, but he at least got to experience a little bit more, you
Hmm.
know, when they got better well known, so they didn't have to sleep in a rehearsal spot. Let's put it that way. So, but yeah, I mean, as far as experiencing all that, that was really interesting and exciting because I got to sit in a little tiny little boxy rehearsal room and watch those guys rehearse instrumentally when Dave was still in the band, and that was definitely an eye opener. And then showing up one night after a couple of days after I'd taken Dave to my parents' house to let him take a shower and took him out for pizza. And then a few days later, Scott and I go up to the rehearsal place and we see James and Cliff. Is that who we saw? Yeah. And they told us that they put Dave on a bus that morning and this other dude was coming in who played in Exodus. And we were like, and Scott went, bullshit. And Cliff looked at him and went, bullshit, bullshit, because two bullshits equals the truth. And
That's crazy, man.
just shit like that.
Cliff Burton,
Hmm.
great guy.
Super cool dude. Of course, he's a bass player.
Being able to form S.O.D later on with your buddy Scott, that you guys formed Anthrax with similar feeling when the two guys got together and making music with S.O.D.
Well, it was a little more intense musically, but
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
good to
for sure.
jam with him and Charlie again. And I was pretty positive that since they threw Neil Turbin out 7 months after they threw me out, and then called me up about 7 months after they threw Neil out, that it was like, let's find some way to play in a band with Danny again, at least just the two of us or something like that. And I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But it was also that Scott was going to do a band like that at any rate. But then I
Mm,
think he kind
mm.
of merged that with now we can jam with Danny again. Plus, he noticed I was developing a pretty intense bass tone that he thought would be perfect for that. But yeah, to answer your original question, yeah, it was a cool feeling jamming with those dudes again. It was a little strange because it wasn't really a band. We weren't going to go out and take on the world forever or anything. But because at that same time in spring of '85, John Connolly and I were getting closer to getting the final lineup for Nuclear Assault, or at least a known lineup until, around Hansel with Care and all that. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
So crazy,
But
man.
yeah, it was fun doing that. We had no idea it was going to become that popular. We thought that was pretty funny, actually.
I mean, you've cut a successful path for yourself. I mean, able to tour the world with your other projects. It says a lot about your ability to keep pushing on. And Dave, is that something that you kind of got, through your interviews with speaking to the different people that contributed to the book?
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but just that's just Dan in a nutshell. One of my biggest takeaways from working on that was just like, you know, um, Obviously, situationally, it would depend, but overall, like you should trust your gut and follow your heart, and that will lead to, at least a good place mentally. Maybe not like, earth-shattering success or whatever, but you will be like self-fulfilled, which is very important. And yeah, again, that like kind of goes back into the title thing where it's just like you have to keep evolving or you get stale, and that's no fun for anybody. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody I talked to more so just kind of agreed on that. Dan is sort of like what you see is what you get.
Right. I was going to say, yeah.
Very humble, very funny, down to earth guy. People just kind of like being around him. So, yeah, I mean, that's all like one package, really.
One of the things that I dig about the second edition of the book is that there's I think that there's extra photos and so forth that weren't in the first book. And Danny, there's a photo. I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 86 or 89. You, Doro, Beefcake from Guar, Joy Ramone, Tom Araya. Uh, I mean, could you not fit anybody else in the photo? I mean, that just I think that photo sums up, what your music and your career has gone to, being with all these different, just amazing people.
I think that was one of those music industry convention things in like New York or LA or something where you would have such an odd combination of people. But I do know what you mean because
Yeah.
cool because they're just not necessarily people from the same genre of music you're doing, but still people that you see in magazines all the time. I grew up on shit like the Ramones and everything. I liked the Ramones before I liked Priest and Motorhead, but
And touring across the country and the world, I'm sure you run into, people and, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, and so forth.
yeah, it's great, touring the world and then like especially doing some big Eurofest and then you see a bunch of people from back home and everything. Hey, it's cool seeing, just friends that you've made all over the world from other countries and getting to see them again. So,
I'm just outside of Philadelphia. I'm in the suburbs, and I'm about 20 minutes from City Garden, where City Gardens used to be in Trenton. And
uh,
there's a story about S.O.D and Suicidal playing there, and that blew my mind. Like I freaking wish I would have gone to that show, man. It just, just craziness.
yep, I remember that. Yep, that was pretty nuts, man.
March of the S.O.D is one of those tracks that just I think embodies everything that defines metal. I mean, I don't know though if that album could be made now in 2024. I
You
mean, it's
think?
non-PC and whatnot, and everyone's, get their panties in a bunch, but I was listening to it obviously to get ready for the interview, and it still holds up, man. It's intense music.
Thanks, man. And yeah, I would definitely agree that some people just don't have a sense of humor as much as they used to. That's all I'll say on that. Been talking about this cancel culture stuff for a while, but and it's pretty obvious. So yeah.
One of the things you talk about, couple, like hanging out at CBGBs and, playing also, but just hanging out and Lemoore as well. You talk about people that you run into there, hanging out with, meeting King Diamond and Voivod and Jason Newsted. And between those two clubs, I get the feeling like that's kind of what the LA strip scene would have been on the West Coast.
Well, I mean, when I went to LA back in the day there, I mean, we would play, you could play down in Orange County, like in Fenders, or you could play in Hollywood. Obviously, Hollywood by then was, dominated by hair metal, which was fair. That was their city. They could do
Mhm.
that, but obviously there were bands like Slayer and Dark Angel and, other bands, whole bunch of good hardcore bands, obviously Black Flag and all that stuff from Southern California too. But I think that New York was more compact, so you had CBGB's, which was on the Lower East Side. Um, and Lemoore was in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, but even that compared to LA and all the traffic and everything. I mean, New York had its share of traffic, but
Yeah.
you know, um, In LA, you could have the Valley. If you're going from the Valley down to Orange County, I mean, shit, that could take 3 hours. I mean, you could probably drive halfway to New York City from where I live now in Rochester at that time. And that's like fucking 180 miles.
Sure.
But I know what you mean. There was like few key little linchpin clubs that people would gravitate to. And it's not like that anymore. Every time I
No,
go
hell no.
it's always a different venue or it's all corporate. It's always like this theater with some, the M&M Candy Theater or whatever the hell.
Right, right.
It's all right if I get some free M&Ms upon arrival, but I did it,
Yeah,
just like Happy Halloween.
exactly, man.
Mhm.
Nuclear Assault. I mean, again, kudos, man, killer music. And Brainwash was on MTV's Headbangers Ball. I remember seeing it, and I believe in the book you talk about. You've done interviews with MTV with Adam Curry and Ricky Rockman. Um, at that time, that had to been kind of cool seeing the video up on Headbangers Ball and on MTV when MTV was, good.
Yes. Yes, that's definitely when MTV was definitely good. Especially at 2 in the morning. Yeah.
Oh, seriously, man.
But no, that was cool. I mean, that was good. The label got them to promote our video. The VJ seemed, a little perplexed sometimes, like they looked like they had like a wild animal in a cage near them, like, so, you don't bite, do you? You
Yeah.
know. Um, but yeah, so it was funny because yeah, basically like Howie Abrams, my bro from In Effect Records, he just like handed Ricky Rockman like a list of questions which he read woodenly, you know.
Seriously, wow.
It's okay. Whatever. I don't want him to come up with the fucking questions.
Kind of thought that Ricky Rockman would be kind of more in tune, but I guess I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, he was a cool dude, but I don't think he was a thrash fan. Let's
Mhm.
put it that way. He was more on the glam side of things. So that might have been a little out of his little wheelhouse. That's all.
Gotcha, gotcha. I gotcha. You talk about touring in '89 with Exodus. Uh, Gary Holt is amazing, and etc. I've spoken to him a couple times. That had to been cool crossing New York with those guys.
Oh, hell yeah. We were good friends with those guys by then. We'd already been, I'd played shows with Exodus since like 85 before Nuclear Assault even had anything out, like with maybe one show with the drummer before, Glenn even, I think, which is true actually in like August 85. So we known those guys for ages anyway. And then, Zetro joined the band when Bailoff split and everything. And yeah, that was great. Still have the tour book for that down there in the Den of Metal. And that helped, all that stuff helped Dave and I, get the book, all those details together. Things like me bringing home tour books and laminates and posters and stuff.
Sure.
But
But even over and above the music and so forth, there's a little story about how you describe the drive through Germany, to get to play Berlin. And again, back in the day, you had the wall, and that had to have been just, and I think there was guard towers and so forth along the road. I mean, that had to have been, coming from New York and seeing this, in Germany, that had to have been intense, man.
yeah, that was pretty trippy. I mean, we knew that all our papers were in order and everything, but so when you get to Berlin, boom, all of a sudden you're in the West again. You just go through and now you're just in like normal West Germany, which, that's what it was back then. But yeah, on the way there, that, the rather limited facilities at the service stops and stuff like that. And the fact that it was just, there were no exits. You just basically it's a straight shot to Berlin and it is not possible to do anything else, as they would say in Germany. Yeah.
That is crazy, man. Dave,
Mhm.
I know that you interviewed the Atomic Clock, Gene Hoglan, and
Yes.
he has a really cool story. Can you summarize some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I won't give the whole thing away, but I will say that was probably one of my favorite interviews. I've always looked up to him. I played drums, not even anywhere in the same universe like Gene. But yeah, I was glad that he came up in conversation with Danny because it gave me an excuse to interview him. But he, first of all, well, okay, I'll say it this way. He told a very flattering story, just again, that speaks to the type of person that Dan is. Very selfless, and just, a good guy when there is the potential to be a not so good guy on a heavy metal tour.
Sure.
Um, and before we actually kind of like got into the conversation, Gene was like, he's like, I want to preface this by saying that I've told this story to people just like out in the wild, so to speak. But he was very grateful to have it, as he put it, like on the record, like in print in a book.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like I said, he had, told it to people, but that's just sort of like out in the ether somewhere. And now we have it like in print, hopefully forever, unless all of the copies get destroyed somehow. But yeah, so that was very flattering for him to share that and be very happy to share it. That made me feel like, okay, we're kind of onto something here with this book.
And that story shows one side of Danny. And Danny, there's another side which I laughed my ass off. The metal monitors and the story behind the metal monitors.
I will tell this story quickly, which was just that when Cannibal Corpse Immolation and Brutal Truth went on tour in the States, Brutal Truth didn't have anything out yet. People didn't really know Brutal Truth, but they knew who I was. So they'd see me as soon as the doors opened, to see me milling around, waiting to go on stage, go, hey man, you're Danny Lilker. What are you doing here? I'm like, oh, I play in the first bands. But after that happened in like 10 different cities, I got bored doing that and decided to just be super sarcastic. So instead they go, what are you doing here? And I would look both ways and go, look, I'm in a secret society called the Metal Monitors. We show up at shows to make sure that all the right bands are on the bill and all the blah, blah, blah. And there's none of that new metal shit because, this is the middle of the 90s. So
Yeah.
you had to police that shit, dude. So I started telling people that, and they were like really impressed. And then half an hour later, they'd see me on stage and go, "Oh, what an asshole!"
Best story ever. I love that. All right,
Mhm.
listen, I'll let you go to get ready for your next one. I appreciate the time. Perpetual Conversion's out now. Danny, it's been cool. Dave, it's a pleasure, man, and I hope I get to talk to you guys later again.
Cool, thank
All
you.
right, cheers, man. Thanks for having us.
Come on, guys. Take care of yourselves.
All right, man. See ya.
Bye bye.